Senator McCarthy, when Johnson dropped out of the race, what did you think was the real reason for him dropping out of the race?
When he announced it, he said he was doing it so that he wouldn't be accused of politics because of what he did subsequently or what he might do. I thought for a while that maybe he was going to pull out of the war and wanted to say, I didn't do it because of you people. But when he didn't do that, it seems to me sort of borne out by time that he was pulling out so he could retain control over the issue. That if he'd stayed in, he probably would have been defeated personally, or at least he would have lost on the issue and would have had to admit that he'd lost control of the war. But by pulling out, he put himself in a position to control the issue and to impose it on the Democratic Party. And that's really what the convention was about. It was an exercise in the transfer of guilt or responsibility to the party. And Johnson stood back, and I'm fairly certain that if he'd lost that fight in the Democratic Party, that he very probably would have supported the Republicans. It was a kind of classical choice, I think, of do you give up the office and control the power, or at least pretend that you control it, or do you try to keep the office and admit you've lost control over the power over the issue? And he made the classical choice, which was to try to hold on to power, even if it meant giving up the office.
Now, the business of selecting a candidate for being president, it kind of confuses me. Is there any simpler way to go about this?
Well, there could be a better way. In the case of the Democrats, when this campaign is completed, they will have used 5 different methods in picking their candidate in the last 5 elections. 68 was the old style kind of convention. 72, the rules were revised pretty much by George McGovern, and they were just right to get him nominated. The 72 rules were criticized, and they were revised by a commission including Jimmy Carter. And when they were done revising them, they were just right for Jimmy to get nominated. Then in anticipation of 1980, the Carter people revised the rules again so they'd be sure he'd get renominated. And if they hadn't, he might not have been renominated. And then in 84, they revised the rules again to be sure that Senator Mondale, or Vice President Mondale then, would get nominated. And they've revised the rules again. And in that period, they have gone from rather controlled procedures that they had in 68, undemocratic, to a very democratic procedure in 1976. And since that, they've been progressively reverting to the methods that were used back in 68, with the exception of the proliferation of primaries. And I think the system really has to receive national attention so that certain orderly rules of procedure will be followed. And if I were to recommend it, I would propose something like the New York primary, or at least what it was. They've changed it some since, but in that primary in 68, I wasn't on the ballot. The people who wanted to be for me had to go out and tell the voters in their districts that they were delegates and that they were going to support me, or that they wanted the people to trust them. And it's essentially the principle that was incorporated in the old idea of the Electoral College, which has been almost completely ignored in party procedures. But I think that's the orderly way to do it. It would probably take 3 or 4 presidential elections before it was installed and operating in place, and I think from that point on, you'd have a much better selection of presidential candidates.
It seems like we've lost sight of the issues with dealing with the personalities of each candidate. We seem to be going from plagiarism to adultery and all that sort of things. But what do you think are the real issues of this campaign?
I think that what you have in the Republican Party, even though there's some slight differences between Bush and Dole, are candidates who pretty well represent that party and its record and its position. In the case of the Democrats, there's great confusion about what the platform ought to be. In contrast with what I'd say 1960, when Senator Humphrey ran against John Kennedy in the primaries and Kennedy won, there was very little difference between the two of them on issues. the party position was dominant. And each one ran sort of saying, I'm better able to do it, you know, and I'm more deserving because of what I've done for the party. After it was over, the party platform was the platform of Kennedy. Now the candidates sort of run promising to give you new ideas. Gary Hart, you say, well, you know, what's wrong with the old ideas? Maybe there is something wrong with them. Other candidates say, no, I'm for the old ideas. Paul Simon primarily. Gephardt has some separate opinions and positions, so that each candidate to some degree is out trying to sell himself, but also his platform. And then when the convention is over, supposedly he could impose his platform on the party, but it hasn't worked very well. McGovern attempted to do that in '72, and he got beat. Mondale, in a way, attempted to do it, although he was closer to the party position. And again, he lost, so that I think the Democrats are in a difficult position right now, casting about for a candidate and casting about more significantly for a platform.